came in. David, Daniel, Brett, Sharon, Marcia, Jill. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday Night Live, episode 27. I can't believe we've been doing this for 27 weeks, and I am thrilled that all of you are here, and I'm always excited to do Wednesday Night Live. My goal, essentially, if I had to pick one for my career, really is to educate people to become their own authorities in health, because I think that is your responsibility. It's your birthright to be able to make choices for yourself. And I hope that my education provides you with the information and hopefully some inspiration to be able to make those choices for yourself and for your loved ones. As always, this is sponsored by Miracle Noodle, my company that I started in 2006. And as I see, there's some people here who might be from my Facebook channel or my YouTube channel. And if you're not familiar with Miracle Noodle, it's basically a plant-based alternative to high-calorie rice and high-calorie pasta. It's made from the root of a konjac plant and is great for, doing things like helping with blood sugar and allowing you to be able to eat foods that are essentially comfort-like foods, pasta, rice, ready-to-eat meals and such. So check us out at miraclenoodle.com. So tonight we're going to be talking about micronutrients. And what is so important about micronutrients is that we all are often focused too much on thinking about macronutrients. Now, macronutrients, many of you know, are fat and carbohydrates and protein. And we tend to spend a lot of time, a lot of people thinking that if they just get those ratios right, and they're eating some vegetables, that they're not going to have to worry about micronutrients. My goal for tonight's episode 27 is to have an understanding of micronutrients and where to go if you are interested in doing lab tests. In fact, at the end of tonight's episode, I'm actually going to show you an advanced lab report using my own results to show you how science has advanced such that you can actually get lab tests to be able to evaluate micronutrients. And when I ask people, if I were to do, say, a survey, maybe we'll do that here and through the chat box. If you could tell me, what do you think micronutrients are? Type that into the chat box. And we'll see if you can list all different categories of micronutrients. Okay, someone said vitamins, right? Okay, that is a micronutrient, definitely. Another person says vitamins, very good. Can anyone think of any other micronutrient that is something that you need to take for your health? Okay, someone said essential fatty acids, right? That is also essentially you can consider it a micronutrient, especially certain ones, and we'll talk about that as well. And the reason this is important is because there's something called hidden hunger, which is basically this notion that, and epidemic really, of people who are getting enough calories, but they're not getting enough micronutrients. So Trisha is saying minerals and Sharon is saying metals. That's right. Minerals and metals are essentially very much the same thing, and we'll go through that. In addition to talking about minerals, we'll talk, and you'll start to understand how all these things sort of interact. And to me, it's fascinating, and hopefully you'll find it fascinating as well. So we're dealing with this hidden epidemic of what's called hidden hunger, where people are not getting the micronutrients in their diet, even though they're eating excess numbers of calories. So we're going to go through how to have a clear understanding of all these things based on categories, as well as looking at a lab test at the end of tonight's episode. So let me share my screen. One moment. And we'll pull up the mind map. All right. So you should be able to see my screen now. Let me blow this up a little bit. As always, we love participation. So I appreciate already we've had some good participation. So this is the general categories that we're going to be discussing. So we have vitamins, and we'll break that down. Well, minerals, which we've spoken about already, which include essentially it's a type of metal, essentially, but minerals as well. phytonutrients, which are those things that are found in plants. Phyto means plant, and essential fatty acids, and then amino acids. All of these I consider to be micronutrients because one of them in the category of one of these things could cause a problem. So it's a very micro amount of something that could potentially cause some problems. So vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, essential fatty acids, amino acids, and then we'll talk about lab testing. So let's start with vitamins. And obviously, I'm not going to be going through every vitamin that we're going to be eating in our diet, because that would be certainly the topic of multiple episodes. We're going to cover just the idea, general ideas, and make special reference to a certain number of vitamins. So as always, I think all of you who have been on my episodes realize that I like to use mind maps. This is a mind map. And the reason I like to use mind maps is because it gives you a framework to understanding things. It gives you an overall picture of what actually things look like and how they're categorized. Because once you are able to categorize things, you can see the big picture. A lot of times people teach and they just recite a series of facts without putting it into a coherent presentation. And when you're able to see this, just this overall picture that I'm showing you now, you realize that micronutrients are broken down into these categories. And so it gives you an idea of how things are related to each other. And you'll get to see that more as we go through this. So vitamins can generally be divided into many different categories. So one way of doing it is to talk about the water-soluble vitamins, then the fat-soluble vitamins, and then we'll talk about 6 vitamins of note, just ones that tend to have some maybe increased importance in maybe your situation, my situation. Let's start with the water-soluble vitamins. So when you get like a B complex, most of the B vitamins are essentially water soluble. And though that means that they're not stored in the body, except for B12, which is stored in the liver. And people who are vegan, let's say, who aren't getting a lot of B12, if you decided to say be vegan tomorrow, depending on the amount of B12 stored in your liver, it's going to last a certain period of time. But the issue is here that it's one of the water-soluble vitamins, but it is stored in the liver. Now, the fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K. And that means that when you take them, they can actually be stored. They can be stored in the fat in your body. And that means that you could potentially take too much. You can have something like what's called hypervitaminosis A. You can take too much vitamin D, although it's fairly difficult. All of these things can actually be stored in your body, and that's what makes this distinction. Which means, of course, that if you went through a period of malnutrition and you had enough stored of these vitamins, you wouldn't see the implications or the end result of a deficiency for a certain period of time. With water-soluble vitamins, since with the exception of B12, if you had a period of malnutrition, let's say, then the deficiency state can occur pretty quickly. And so that is something to think about. Now, 6 vitamins of note that we'll just go through these because we have a lot to cover looking at all these other types of things. So first is B12. Now, B12 is an issue for a lot of people, and especially, of course, vegetarians or vegans. Vegans especially. Vegans can have B12 deficiency because B12 is found in pretty much exclusively animal products. There are some plant-based products that have B12. In fact, we sell one on miraclenoodle.com. It's called Sugar Vita. It's actually it's an organic palmyra sugar from the palmyra tree. And it's very interesting, but it's actually a very good source of B12. So when you hear people say that there are no plant sources of B12, there are actually, and we sell one of them on our website. But what makes it even more important these days, especially as people age and they have trouble with digesting proteins, is that as you get older, your requirement for B12 can increase because of decreasing stomach acid, but also if you're on these medications. So if you're on acid medications for over acidity in your stomach, or even metformin, this is going to potentially decrease your absorption of B12 and cause you to actually have a higher requirement. Now, folate, which is also a B vitamin, is found in leafy green vegetables. Now, folic acid is something very, very different. Folic acid is a synthetic vitamin. It does not occur naturally in nature. And we've all heard of folic acid. Most of us have, at least, because it's given to pregnant women to help with the way the spinal cord forms in infants. And a lot of women are given folic acid supplements. The interesting thing is that, of course, this is synthetic. So the best thing, and I'm not saying women shouldn't take folic acid, a lot of leafy green vegetables, you're always going to have enough folate. The issue with folic acid is that there are people who have a genetic, what's called a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism, which basically means that there are people who have trouble genetically, they have a genetic mutation to process folic acid. They're unable to process it. In fact, it can actually make them sick. And it's actually a much larger percent of the population than you would ever think. And in fact, I actually have a mutation for this that can cause you to get sick if you eat a lot of folic acid. And folic acid is found in all kinds of things. It's added to foodstuffs. It's added as a, what do they call it? Enriched flour, as an example, will have folic acid, and certain vitamins, like you take a multivitamin. I always tell people, if they don't know their genetic status, don't get a vitamin with folic acid. You always want it to be a form of folate. And there are many different kinds of folates, but folic acid is synthetic, and that's something to be aware of. Vitamin D, which is a fat-soluble vitamin, it's very difficult to get from your diet. There are certain things like mushrooms and some seafood that have decent levels, but in order to get to a decently high level, it's one of those things, unfortunately, that you almost always have to rely on supplementation. And of course, we all know that vitamin D is associated with sun exposure, and you go out into the sun and you get vitamin D. But unfortunately, there have been some studies to show that they did studies on surfers in Hawaii, that once they got to a certain tan, that their vitamin D levels actually dropped, and these surfers who were out surfing for a couple hours per day were actually vitamin D deficient. So the truth is if you're having to check things, as you get older, or if you're on these medications, you should get a B12 test. You should also get a vitamin D test. Now, I'm going to show you at the end of this episode a comprehensive micronutrient panel, which I ran on myself, and I think you'll find it really interesting. That obviously has B12 and vitamin D3, as well as a bunch of vitamins, and you'll see that as well. B6, it's basically in lots of different plant foods, and I put this in here because it's used for close to 200 biochemical reactions. A lot of these vitamins that's what their purpose is. Their purpose is to allow one chemical in your body to proceed to the next step in a long process, and that's sort of like greasing the wheels of the things that are going on in your body. And if you don't have enough vitamins, then the chains and the network of one thing turning into another thing can tend to slow down. And when that slows down, you can get things that build up that can be dangerous for you. And you can end up with not getting the final product, which is also going to cause deficiencies of some sort. So that's what vitamins, essentially that's what vitamins do. They have lots of different functions, but B6 in general is used to close to 200 biochemical reactions. Now, if you're eating a variety of plant-based foods, and that's always, every single episode, we've talked about how increasing the diversity of the plants that you eat is one of the most important things you can do. We've spoken about it from lots of different perspectives. We've spoken about it because it increases the microbiome, the beneficial bacteria in your gut when you eat a variety of plant foods. We've spoken about how obviously you're not going to be able to get the amount of variety, and we're going to be talking about that when we talk about phytonutrients and how incredible the number of chemicals are when you eat a variety of plant-based foods. And we spoke about it historically. In fact, when you look at the history of humanity, and people were, hunter-gatherers, it analyzed the number of types of plants they ate, and the number and the diversity was incredible. It was, like hundreds of different plant type things. And nowadays, even people who are health conscious, they go to the store, they buy broccoli every week. Then, they buy the same lettuce every week. And they really, even if you look at these people who are eating a lot of plants and have a generally very, very good diet, their diversity of plants is not as much as it should be. And it goes even beyond that. We've also spoken about how different families of plants have different things about them, which means that, say, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, kale, collards, mustard greens, they're actually in the same family. And while it's amazing for you to eat cruciferous vegetables, that's just one family. And the broccoli and the kale, obviously, one has they're different, of course, but they're not so different as they would be if you chose from a lettuce family, a cruciferous vegetable family, that sort of thing. So you want to always think about what kind of diversity you have in your foods. Then let's talk about vitamin A and beta-carotene. So vitamin A is what's called preformed. It's ready to go. Beta-carotene, which is, many of you know, like in carrots and other vegetables, a lot of the pigments in some of the green and yellow vegetables. Now, in your body, beta-carotene has to be converted into vitamin A. This is another one of those things where, for the most part, we are capable of converting beta-carotene to vitamin A. But I've had patients that have run genetic tests on where they have a genetic mutation where it's very difficult for them to convert beta-carotene to vitamin A. Now, that doesn't mean that they end up having a vitamin A deficiency, but it does mean that if they increase the amount of preformed vitamin A, which is found either in a vitamin or in animal foods, that's where vitamin A is found, especially like organ meats, but in other plants, other animals, then they can get that in its preformed state, and you might be able to see some sort of improvement in feeling and overall health. It's very difficult to have a vitamin A deficiency because even with that genetic mutation, because if you're eating a lot of beta-carotene, and most of us, again, if we're eating a large variety of plants, we're going to get that beta-carotene. And even if we have the genetic mutation, we'll probably form enough vitamin A. But same thing goes here. If you're a vegan and you have that mutation and you are not a healthy vegan in the sense maybe you're eating chips and soda, that's vegan, but you're not eating a lot of vegetables and you have this mutation, then it could be an issue. Next is vitamin C. And what's interesting about vitamin C is actually that almost all animals, they create their own vitamin C in their body, but humans, apes, and guinea pigs actually don't. And they have to take vitamin C from outside. Now, I'm one of these people that thinks vitamin C is really an incredible thing that everyone should be taking. And if you look at some of the original work that's been done on vitamin C by certain doctors, what they did was they looked at the dose that animals made per body weight. And when you look at it, it's massive dose. In other words, let's take, a horse as an example. Horses make their own vitamin C. So if you look at the amount of vitamin C they produce per body weight and converted that over to what a human would have to create, the same amount, that it's massive doses. And so a lot of people think that even though we're fine with, like 250 milligrams or even less sometimes per day, I mean, you probably get away with a lot less without having, overt things like scurvy, which, was what the sailors had problems with because they didn't have any vitamin C. Generally speaking, we probably need a little bit more because as you learn about the biochemical reactions in the body, you realize how integral vitamin C is to so many different things, from, obviously from things like your immune system to obviously things that are related to your skin. I mean, a whole host, and collagen, a whole host of things. And again, the more you learn about it, the more you see vitamin C popping up in all these different things around the body. And it's a really fascinating thing. So I tend to be one of those doctors that thinks that everyone should be taking vitamin C. There are very few cases where people have problems with vitamin C. The only one that I can really think of is families that have what's called hemochromatosis. That can be an issue because vitamin C increases the uptake of iron. And if you have a condition where your body is storing too much iron, then your iron can go a little bit too high. But that's pretty much the only reason that I could think of someone not taking some supplemental vitamin C. Now, it's always best to get everything you can from your food. I'm never, ever going to suggest that you just take a vitamin, because we'll talk about that at length in just a moment when we get to phytonutrients. But the truth is that with vitamin D is very difficult. Obviously, if you're eating some citrus or even other vegetables, you're going to get vitamin C. I just feel that there's enough data out there to show that a little bit of extra supplemental vitamin C is probably good insurance. All right, let me do a time check. Wow, we got to keep moving quickly here. All right, let's go to minerals. Now, minerals can basically be divided into macro minerals, trace minerals, and heavy metals. Now, the macro minerals, many of you have heard of, and these are all things that are can be tested. In fact, sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, they're all part of the general sort of metabolic panel that your doctor gets every year. The issue is, and we'll get into this in more detail later, is that your body is in the blood, needs to maintain things at a very careful, balance. It's sort of like if you had a saltwater aquarium. Everyone knows that you have to keep things like at a very, very delicate balance. When pH goes off by a little bit or mineral goes off by a little bit, then the whole ecosystem tends to have a problem. Well, the same thing happens in the liquid, in the blood. The body is going to do its best to make sure that the blood itself has the right levels of these things. But to be able to determine what your levels are, you need to be able to look at things inside the cell. Because inside the cell, just as an example with say calcium, you've got all this calcium in your bones, and your body needs a certain amount of calcium in your blood to be able to do all kinds of things related to the way the cell communicates from inside to outside, blood pressure, numerous things. And your body, at the expense of calcium, essentially, is of your bones, it's going to take out your calcium out of your bones if it needs calcium in the blood, which means that you could still be remarkably calcium deficient, but your blood is going to show that your levels are normal. So it's important to test to be able to tell whether your calcium and your magnesium is good by looking at the cellular tests. And now the general metabolic panel that your doctor gets doesn't actually get that test. And I'll show you what that test looks like again at the end of tonight's episode. Just in general, sulfur, it's found in protein-rich foods. Sodium, we all know, chloride, potassium. Magnesium, nuts, seeds, beans, leafy greens, dark chocolate. There's somewhat of an epidemic of magnesium deficiency. And there's a worldwide plant deficiency problem, in fact. The soils are depleted of magnesium, which leads to low levels of magnesium in vegetables. And when there are low levels of magnesium, unfortunately, sometimes it actually gets swapped with heavy metals like cadmium. So we have a problem with magnesium. And if we have a worldwide plant deficiency problem, that means that there's going to be a worldwide deficiency problem. Again, the issue is that magnesium, which is involved in so many different things around the body, especially like relaxation of the muscles and heart, lots of other things, your body is going to keep it at a level in the blood, but at the cost of it in the cell, which is going to affect all kinds of different things related to the overall functioning of your body, just to make sure that, your heart doesn't go into an arrhythmia because your magnesium is out. So the blood is really buffered and carefully controlled. But to really understand what your magnesium level is, you have to check it inside the cell. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Calcium, we all know bones, nerve, muscle function, immune health, blood pressure, found in dairy, but it's also found in cruciferous vegetables. And the issue is that, if you have a little dairy, it's more bioavailable, which means your body can absorb it better. You can get a lot of calcium from your cruciferous vegetables, but it's not absorbed as much. Beans as well. So those are essentially your macro minerals. Now, let's talk about your trace minerals. So we have iron, which is a trace mineral, zinc, iodine, selenium, copper, manganese, fluoride, chromium, and molybdenum. I'm going to focus a little, we've spoken a little bit about iron with vitamin C. You don't want too much of any of these, because if you have too much of it, then there's going to be a toxicity. And the amazing thing about all these trace minerals is there's actually a delicate balance between all these. The zinc copper ratio is something that people look at, and it's in one of the tests that I'm going to show you at the end of tonight's talk. Just doing a time check here. And you'll see that the ratio between these two minerals is something that that we look at. Too little zinc and a lot of copper is generally what you want to avoid, but even having too much zinc can be an issue. Now, this becomes a problem, I see, in that a lot of, especially now with COVID, a lot of people are starting to take zinc because, rightly so, it's very helpful. But the problem is many are taking too much zinc. You don't need any more than 20, 25 milligrams per day, maybe even a little bit less, maybe 15 to 25 milligrams per day. The problem with taking 50 or 100 milligrams per day, which is sometimes what the supplement companies dose it at, is that you can end up having an issue with this ratio of zinc to copper. So you don't want to go crazy with your zinc. Zinc is very important. It's needed for all kinds of enzymes in the body, and those enzymes are partially responsible for, how we were saying that the vitamins help the one chemical turn into another chemical, turn into another chemical. Well, in order for it to go from step 1 to step 2, you often need an enzyme. So in addition to the vitamins, sometimes you need zinc to be able to help form these enzymes. So it can be related to taste, immune system health, obviously, as we know from this COVID epidemic, and wound healing as well. Iodine, we've all heard of, critical for the thyroid. I recommend a small amount of kelp because the iodized salt is not really that efficient at giving you the iodine. You certainly won't get a goiter like people used to get years and years ago because there was no iodine in the, they weren't eating seafood or kelp, but you can get a kelp supplement, and it's a very, very small dose of kelp, and you get a little bit in the microgram range of iodine. And I think that that's an important thing for a lot of people. Manganese, fluoride, chromium, molybdenum, all these are trace elements. There's so much to talk about. You could spend a lot of time talking about all of these, but again, too much iron is a problem. Too much zinc is too much of anything is not good, obviously. And then, of course, we have heavy metals. Now, these are not micronutrients, but they are toxins. Mercury, we're all very familiar with, found in seafood. So seafoodwatch.org, which is a program of the Monterey Aquarium outside San Francisco, publishes a list every year of what the safe seafood is in terms of mercury counts. Lead, of course, getting enough iron and vitamin C is going to help with lead. Arsenic, which more recently has been associated with rice, unfortunately, that people are eating an enormous amount of, say, brown rice. That could be an issue. Well water used to be a big problem with arsenic, and if you have a well, they often do test for arsenic. Cadmium has become a big problem in the soils, and it can cause kidney damage. It's again another thing that iron helps with cadmium, as does magnesium. and zinc. Vitamin C, B1, B6, these in deficiency make this worse. And all of these, tomato, grape, curry leaf, green tea, onion, ginger, garlic, help with these various heavy metals. Now, we did a episode, I don't remember which number it is, that talked about the natural detox mechanisms in the body with other suggestions. But what you can learn from this list is, again, you want a wide variety and wide diversity of plants in your diet, as wide and diverse as you possibly can. Don't stick to the same vegetables that you eat every week. I mean, we're so lucky, right? You can go to a store and there's an incredible number of vegetables to try, different vegetables to try. And sometimes, you can try, don't be scared to try frozen vegetables. They're often more nutrient dense than the ones that are in the produce aisle, because they're often frozen immediately after they're picked. And you'll find some vegetables over there that maybe you wouldn't necessarily buy, that maybe they don't have, like mustard greens or collards. And if you have like an instant pot to make a stew to really cook these down, you can be adding an enormous amount of nutrient dense vegetables to your diet. But the point is to do the best you can to try things and keep adding things to your diet. Now, the phytonutrients are probably the most amazing thing. I think I'm using the word amazing a lot, but it all is amazing to me. There was an article that I brought up a couple times, actually, and I have it right here. It was entitled "The Unmapped Chemical Complexity of Our Diet." It's just recently published. And what he was talking about was something really incredible. There's so much that we don't know. There's this database called the Food DB. And essentially, when you look at the USDA, they basically quantify, with garlic as an example, 67 nutritional components that are found in garlic. But it actually contains 2,306 distinct chemicals. That's amazing, which means that we haven't even isolated these chemicals, and they probably all have some effect. Some of them may be incredibly beneficial for the body, but who is going to be able to study all of these things? The Food DB database has 26,625 biochemicals, which is just going to continue to increase. And the point that he was trying to make in his article was that we're basically going to need, we're not going to tackle these with individual scientific studies. It's just too many. We're going to need different advanced computational types of science to be able to figure this out. And he gave the example of how at first, when the human genome was decoded, there was all this dark matter, all this empty space. And they said, well, it turns out that only a couple percentage of your DNA does anything. Well, as we learn, that's actually not the case. There's, in those sort of dark regions, there are all kinds of signals that can affect cancer rates and a whole host of other things. And now with phytonutrients, with these chemicals that are found in plants, there's probably a couple hundred that have been exhaustively studied and have good data on them. But that's way less than 1% of the actual biochemicals, which, as he rightly says, will continue to increase. Now, why is it that there's so many chemicals that in plants that are not found in animal foods? And the reason is interesting. It's because throughout thousands of years, animals, when they were threatened, could run away, but plants had to stay still. And in order to defend themselves, they became biochemists. They were able to create all these chemicals to defend themselves from the sun, defend themselves from predators. And they became like organic chemistry factories, churning out and evolving to create all kinds of different biochemicals in the body that now, when we ingest those biochemicals, can have beneficial effects and, of course, some negative effects. But overall, when a plant is trying to protect itself from, say, the sun, it creates all these amazing pigments. And these pigments, when we eat, benefit us. So it's a miraculous sort of synchrony that happens between plants and humans, and why plants are so incredibly important for us. And when you think about 26,000, often one of the first things that occurs to me is like, what's the point of taking a vitamin when we don't even know 26,000 of these chemicals? Well, we know vitamins, so there's data and there's reasons, but when it comes to phytochemicals, taking, say, a phytochemical supplement, I mean, it's such a narrow type of thing that you're better off just eating the wide variety of plants that you possibly can. So that's the phytonutrients. Next, we have essential fatty acids, and just doing a time check here. Let me close some of these down. So essential fatty acids, we've also spoken about before. Now, many of you are aware of omega-3s and omega-6s. Of course, the omega-3s are found in the fish, as you know, walnuts, but they start off as what's called alpha-linolenic acid, ALA. And that's found in things like flax and some like walnuts and some chia seeds, hemp seeds. Most of these have a ratio. They have both omega-3 and omega-6. Now, we need both of these. And if you don't get these, you're going to be very, very sick. Now, they're found in nuts and seeds. What happens is that the omega-3, the ALA in your body, is able to be converted into something called DHA and EPA, which are what found naturally in fish. Some people have a genetic polymorphism, that mutation that we spoke about before, where they have very difficult time converting this ALA to this longer, this is like very short, and the DHA is this sort of long chain, which is very important for brain and pregnancy and neurological development. And it can also help with elevated triglycerides if you have the right genetic marker. And sometimes, as I said, some people have this genetic issue where they can't convert from this to this. And in those cases, it's important for them, especially if they're not getting enough of the ALA, because some of it gets converted, to be able to consider taking DHA, like taking a fish oil. You should always have a good reason for why you're taking a supplement. If you're just taking a supplement because, whatever, there was an advertisement, or, the only answer you can give is, I think I should, then that's not a good enough reason, and you need to be able to investigate a little bit more into that. Now, omega-6 is also important for the body. It's gotten a bad rap because, generally speaking, people eat too much omega-6 in ratio to omega-3. And just like I was talking about how there's this zinc-copper ratio, the same kind of thing, there's all throughout the entire body, there are all these different things that sort of play off one another. And what happens, as I said from the very beginning, that one chemical turns into the next chemical, turns into the next chemical. And the same thing happens with these. This ALA goes to one step, and then another step, and then another step, and I think it's 5 steps that turn it into DHA. Now, with the omega, but it's inflammatory because our bodies do need some inflammation to fight infections, to do all kinds of things. So the issue is that with modern times, people are eating too many omega-6 fatty acids. These are found in seed oils like sunflower, safflower, corn oil, and not to mention the fact that these oils are often rancid. People are getting too much of these fats. And when the ratio is off, then you're going to have a net inflammatory effect. Years and years ago, the ratio, no one knows what the ideal ratio is, but it's somewhere more like 1 part omega-3 to, maybe 2 to 4 parts omega-6. In the modern American diet, it's 1 part omega-3 to 20 to 50 omega-6. So we're eating way too many of these seed oils, and the seed oils, as I said, generally speaking, are rancid to begin with, not getting enough omega-3s, and the ratio is all messed up because these both compete for the exact same enzymes that we spoke about a little bit earlier. So if one is over there's a predominance of one, it's going to lead to that end result, which is that arachidonic acid, which in excess can be anti-inflammatory. So how do you limit that? Well, get rid of the seed oils in your diet, because essentially they did studies to show that, initially when saturated fats were declared to be terrible, and they definitely do have their issues, they replaced them with omega-6 fatty acids, those seed oils, and it was very effective at lowering cholesterol, but it did nothing for reducing the risk of major cardiovascular disease events. So yes, you're switching from, butter all day long to sunflower oil or canola oil is going to lower your cholesterol. It's not going to reduce your risk for heart disease. So how do you get the best sources of unaltered omega-6? You get them by eating raw nuts and seeds, soaked raw nuts and seeds. That makes them more digestible, and everyone should be eating a handful of raw nuts and seeds per day. And then you're going to get enough of the omega-6. It's not going to be crazy out of proportion, because you could eat, almond butter all day and your ratio is going to be off. So, there's that. I'm looking at the time and we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We spoke about that, and there is a role for omega-3 supplementation, definitely in rheumatoid arthritis, neuropsychiatric disorders like autism, major depression, bipolar disorder. But importantly, since we'll get to it in just a moment, is the fact that you can get what's called an omega index, which basically tells you the percent of the cell membrane that has the amount of omega-3s in it. I'll show you what mine looks like in just a minute. Next is amino acids, and we'll run through this very quickly because I want to spend at least 10 minutes on my lab test, just to show you, practically speaking, what an analysis looks like. And I see we're getting, hi Pat, welcome. It'll be recorded, so you'll get to see it later. Okay, so now we're talking about amino acids. So the body needs 20 amino acids, and there are 9 amino acids that are essential, some that are conditionally essential. These are basically, you can think of protein as like chains, interlinked chains. You could think of it that way. And each amino acid, each protein is made up of a different set of these amino acids. So things like methionine and leucine and lysine and valine, leucine, in a lot of muscle meats, and the others are found in varying different, ratios. And you can identify the type of protein it is by the ratio of the amino acids. Some that are conditionally essential. Which basically means that in certain cases, they become essential. And so your body needs all 20 amino acids, and they definitely needs 9 amino acids so that you can create what you need. And if you don't have these, then you can get very sick. But generally speaking, if you're an omnivore, then it's going to be fine. And even if you're a vegan, it's very difficult. Unless you're, as I said before, an unhealthy vegan that just eats chips and drinks soda, if you're eating a good big salad and a variety of plants, you're not going to have any sort of protein issue, generally speaking. All right, so now let me go and open up my lab test, because we have about an hour, 10 minutes left. And let me hit escape here. Just give me one moment while I share my lab test so we can take a look at this. Give me a moment here while I find it. Okay, here it is. Okay, so let me know if you can see my screen. Let me blow this up a little bit. Can you see my, let me know if you can see my screen. Shouldn't say much on it, but let's go to the top and let's see here. Okay, we'll start here. Can everyone see this lab test on their screen? Okay, thank you, Trisha. So here's what a micronutrient panel looks like. And this is actually my lab test. And as I discussed, so you're going to be able to understand this a little bit from what we've discussed. Remember, I was talking about how in the blood, the body is basically going to be buffering the blood, and it's not a true reflection of what the lab value is. That's what the serum level is. Now, the serum level is important because if it's off, then there certainly could be an issue. But the truth is that in this, when we're dealing with micronutrients, we want to look at what it's like in some cell. In this case, they're using a white blood cell, and you'll see as we go down that, say, with folate, they're using RBC, and there's reasons for that, but they're beyond the scope of the the next 10 minutes. So as you can see, you can look at here vitamin B3, which is essentially niacin. See, I take a niacin supplement, so it would make sense that in the blood, if I took the blood niacin that day, that it would be elevated. But really what we want to look at is what the level is in the white blood cell. So we're looking here at all the things that we discussed. Vitamin A, which is the fat-soluble vitamin, B1, B2, B3, B6, B12, B5, which actually happens to be low in me, and we'll talk about what potentially the reason for that could be. Vitamin C, vitamin D. Now, vitamin D we spoke about, and you want it to be, I think, should be around 50. So my level is a little bit lower than I would like. It's certainly not deficient by any means, but I'll show you what potentially this could be is related to as we go on. So the blood level is 41. Again, it should generally be, actually, this is the test that we're looking at, more so in this case, and it should be around the 50, maybe a little bit higher in my case. Vitamin E, vitamin K1 is found in vegetables, and vitamin K2 is actually found in things like fermented soybeans, which I happen to enjoy, and in certain plants and hard cheeses. Now, I have a very good level of K2 in my cells, but actually a low level in my blood. It just so happens that I ran out of my natto that week. And so I don't eat cheese hardly ever. So my blood level was low, but it's not important in this case because my level here is actually, pretty high. It's usually, most people, it's like 0.2. If it's, it's usually near the lower level. And K2 is important because it's been shown that in a heart study in Rotterdam, it was shown that if your K2 is low, that there's increased calcification of the arteries. And for people whose K2 is higher, they actually have less calcification, less advanced heart disease. So I consider it to be a very important nutrient. And it's very difficult to get high levels unless you're very, very selective. If people aren't going to eat foods that have a lot of K2 in them, it's probably important to take a supplement. Folate, and then they go into calcium, manganese, zinc, copper, all these things we spoke about, chromium, iron, magnesium. Now, magnesium we spoke about, and we're going to look at it from the cellular level because the blood level, unless you're really sick, is not going to be off. And so mine is 4.6 normal. But up here, interestingly, my calcium is low. And we'll go through all of it and then we'll hypothesize why that might be. And this is methylmalonic acid. Mine is a little bit high, which means that potentially I could eventually have a B12 issue. This usually goes up when there's a B12, some kind of B12 deficiency. And now I don't eat a lot of animal protein, but there could be some other reasons for this. And of course, it's not significantly elevated, but, and of course, almost all these are very good. But it's sometimes interesting just to see how these tests work out. So we spoke about the copper-zinc ratio. So the copper-zinc here ratio of 1.7. So we are checking this because we spoke about how that copper-zinc ratio could be an issue. Again, these are probably related to diets of the day, but there's not much to worry about with elevated arginine or asparagine. And these are, as we get into these are your amino acids that we spoke about. These are the branch chain amino acids that are found in animals. So if someone were to eat like a lot of steak and protein and such that day, then they could potentially be elevated. And this test also tests for some antioxidant like coenzyme Q10 and cysteine, glutathione, selenium. All these levels were very good. And then we come to the fatty acids. We spoke about the fatty acids. Now, in this case, we don't look at it at all in the serum. We only look at it in the RBC. And this is going to tell you essentially your omega index. And you want your omega index to be higher than 8. And again, for people, who would this be an issue for? It could be an issue for people who, again, are vegan, let's say, and are having issues that are neuropsychiatric, or people who have bipolar or schizophrenia or even depressive symptoms. If their omega-3 index is low, it is very likely that you can give them an omega-3 supplement. That would be a reason to give someone an omega-3 supplement, that it could actually improve their symptoms. So, so what do we have as we continue here? This is just another way of looking at it. Vitamin A, vitamin B1, B2, B3, B6, B12, B5. B5 was low, and it turns out that if you're taking a biotin supplement, it can lower your B5. And amazingly, I've been taking a B complex for years. And I honestly, I'm almost certain that when I started taking this brand's B complex, it didn't have any biotin. And I'm not a big fan of biotin because it can interfere with lab tests like thyroid and actually some heart lab tests. It doesn't affect the thyroid and the heart, but to the detection ability of the labs. And turns out that actually the B complex that I was eating, that I'm taking, actually has a very high dose of biotin. So anyway, that sort of pointed something out to me, and I need to change that. Now, the vitamin C, vitamin D, as you can see here, probably would be better if I was up here, because you saw that my calcium was a little bit low. Now, it could be because I don't eat any dairy, and maybe I'm having trouble absorbing the calcium from all the vegetables I eat. But it also could be that I just need a little more vitamin D3, because vitamin D3 increases the uptake of calcium. So this is an example in my case that I should really be focusing on getting my vitamin D level up, probably 3 months worth, and then rechecking my calcium. And if my vitamin D level is sort of up here, and as an example, and my calcium is still a little bit low, then probably I need to take some yogurt, a little yogurt per day. I could do that now, but I would rather, because when I eat, just for me personally, when I eat a lot of dairy, I don't tend to feel that good. So it could be that if I increase my vitamin D, that I will be able to increase the calcium. So that would be what I'll be doing. I'll be increasing that, and then in 3 months I'll get another test and see how it goes. And this is the overall vitamin D level that you get checked at your doctor's office. Same sort of thing, and same thing. I generally want it to be a little bit on the higher than normal side. There's the K1. K1's found in vegetables, and we spoke about K2, and we're really focused here on that one. And remember, we spoke about the calcium. So in the serum, like I explained at the very beginning, your body controls the calcium very strongly in the blood. But to get an accurate measurement, you really need to check the count in your white blood cell. And so mine is a little bit low. So that's what we'll focus on the next couple months, getting that D level up that we spoke about, and see how that goes. The other thing, and so here's the zinc and the copper, and then the iron and the magnesium, this is almost always low in my patients. So this is something that I recommend almost everyone taking some sort of magnesium supplement, but certainly having a lab test allows you to have more information. Copper and zinc, that ratio that we spoke about, and this MMA was the only other single thing here. So this basically means that I really do need to consider, even though my B12 level is considered normal, it's still probably worthwhile for me to take a separate vitamin B12 supplement, given the fact that I know that I don't eat a lot of animal protein, very little amount, and also with this level to see if this comes down with increased B12. The select B12 supplement essentially would be indicated. And interestingly, when you have adequate levels of B12, that also helps with the calcium. So it could be that this is partially related to that as well. Otherwise, everything else was normal, but all of these can show very, very interesting things for very commonly, you know, we spoke about the magnesium and the omega-3 index. Just those are very valuable, and you can get those by themselves. Now, we're coming up on the end of the hour, and I just wanted to relate an anecdote which really surprised me because, well, I think you'll see why it surprised me. When I started ordering these tests, I had like a tutorial with the head of the lab to go over how they did these tests, how they gathered the data, a look at various set of numbers of different lab tests to see the different patterns. It was like a full educational session. It was very, very interesting. And the woman who was the head of the lab she was great. And we were having a conversation just about the micronutrients in general and vitamin levels, and how she was telling me or showing me the lab tests to someone, and their vitamin levels were terrible. And I said, well, they probably aren't eating that many vegetables. They probably are, you know, we went through a whole list of, you know, she was sort of like quizzing me. And remarkably, this woman was on a very healthy diet, but she was getting it from a meal plan. She was getting one of these breakfast, lunch, and dinner meal plans. It was a paleo meal plan, but believe it or not, each meal was like over 50% vegetables, fruits and vegetables. And yet she still had all these micronutrient deficiencies. And the reason is because the vegetables that the vegetables they were using were probably incredibly cheap, maybe somewhat old with, you know, poor soils, definitely not organic. And this woman who was eating what she thought was a very healthy diet turned out it wasn't healthy at all. She actually had micronutrient deficiencies, which points to something that we spoke about and started with, that you want to, if you're getting all your food from one company, then there's no question you don't have any control over the biodiversity and all of the variety of plants that you should be eating. And I just thought that was a very telling type of story, in that it allows us to be able to realize how we need to take a lot more control over our situation and not outsource our health to someone else, like a food delivery company. Even though it's convenient and such, we need to take a stand, and we need to do this for ourselves and for our families to be able to make sure that we're getting the proper nutrients in our diet. So that's tonight's lecture. We came up to the hour. Next week, I'm very excited. We're going to be talking about the microbiome again, but in a lot different way. And we're going to talk about the difference between precision, personalized medicine, computational biology. In other words, all the advancements in it. And even though we spoke a little bit about the microbiome in previous episodes, this one's going to give you a much, much deeper appreciation for that, and actually a lot of practical tips to be able to make sure that you have the greatest diversity of microorganisms in your gut, because that's going to impact your thinking, it's going to impact your immune system, it's going to impact your mood, all these things. It's an incredible thing. It's very important for you. And as always, thank you for your attention. I hope that I'm giving you information that allows you, as I say, always to become your own authority and taking control of your health. And I wish everyone a great night, and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night. Bye-bye.